When Brian installed the new doorbell chime at his house, he never expected it to spark a religious war with his homeowners association. But that's exactly what happened. And now he was in a fight for his home, his faith, and his very freedom. The tension had been brewing for weeks. Ever since he'd set up the chime, which played a short passage of scripture whenever someone rang the bell, his neighbors on the HOA board had been up in arms. They claimed it was an overt display of religion that violated community guidelines. But to Brian, it was a sacred part of his faith, a way to glorify God in his own home. "This has to stop," fumed Linda, the HOA president, as she stormed into Brian's living room. "We've received multiple complaints about your doorbell. It's disruptive and inappropriate." Brian straightened his shoulders, jaw set with determination. "It's part of my religious practice. I have a right to express my beliefs in my own home." "Not if it infringes on the comfort of others," Linda snapped. "The board has voted unanimously to demand you remove it. If you refuse, we'll be forced to take legal action." Brian's heart raced, a mixture of fear and righteous anger. This was his home, his sanctuary. How dare they try to dictate his faith? "I'm not removing it," he said firmly. "This is my constitutional right." Linda's eyes narrowed. "Then consider this your final warning. You have 1 week to comply, or we'll see you in court." With that, she turned on her heel and stormed out, leaving Brian alone with his thoughts, his hands trembling slightly. He knew this was far from over. The HOA was willing to go to war, and he had no choice but to fight back. That night, as Brian knelt in prayer, he pleaded for guidance. "Lord, give me the strength to stand firm in my beliefs. Don't let them take away my right to worship in my own home." The next morning, he made a decision. He would not back down, no matter the cost. This was a matter of principle, of religious freedom. He would take this all the way to the federal courts if he had to. Brian spent the next few days researching his legal options, consulting with a religious liberty attorney who assured him he had a strong case. Armed with knowledge and determination, he prepared to face the HOA head-on. The day of the hearing arrived, and Brian took a deep breath as he walked into the community center, clutching a thick folder of documents. Linda and the rest of the board were already seated, their expressions stern. "Mr. Johnson, we'd given you ample time to comply with the board's decision," Linda said coldly. "Yet you've chosen to defy us. Now you'll face the consequences." Brian straightened his shoulders, his voice unwavering. "With all due respect, this is a violation of my First Amendment rights. I have the freedom to practice my religion in my own home, and your demands are unconstitutional." The tension in the room was palpable as the two sides squared off, each determined to emerge victorious. Brian knew that the outcome of this battle would not just determine the fate of his doorbell chime, but the very essence of his right to live out his faith without fear of persecution. The HOA board members exchanged uneasy glances as Brian laid out his legal arguments, citing case after case that supported his right to religious expression in his own home. Linda, her face flushed with frustration, struggled to find a counter-argument that would hold up. "This isn't about religion, Mr. Johnson," she finally said, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's about maintaining community standards and ensuring all residents feel comfortable in their own homes. Your doorbell chime is disruptive and divisive." Brian leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "With all due respect, that's exactly what this is about. You're trying to suppress my faith under the guise of community standards. Well, I won't stand for it." Tension crackled in the air as the two sides refused to back down. Brian could see the determination in Linda's eyes. She was not going to let him win without a fight. Sensing the impasse, the HOA's lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we can reach a compromise. Mr. Johnson, would you be willing to adjust the volume or timer on your doorbell chime so it's less disruptive?" Brian considered the offer, but something in his gut told him it was a trap. "No, I won't compromise my faith. This chime is an integral part of my religious practice, and I have a constitutional right to maintain it. Linda slammed her fist on the table, her composure slipping. Then you leave us no choice. We're filing a formal complaint with the federal court. You'll be hearing from our lawyers. Brian felt a chill run down his spine, but he refused to back down. So be it. I'm prepared to take this all the way. As he left the community center, Brian couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. He knew the HOA was not going to give up easily, and the stakes were higher than ever. But he was determined to fight for his rights, no matter the cost. Little did he know, the battle was about to escalate in ways he could never have imagined. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal activity as the HOA filed its complaint against Brian in federal court. He had hired a top religious liberty attorney, but even with the strength of the law on his side, the pressure was mounting. "They're really pulling out all the stops on this one," his lawyer, Sarah, said grimly. "The HOA has brought in a high-powered legal team, and they're accusing you of violating community covenants, disrupting the peace, and infringing on the rights of other residents." Brian ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of the battle bearing down on him. "But I have the Constitution on my side. Surely the court will see that." Sarah gave him a sympathetic look. "I certainly hope so, but you have to be prepared for a tough fight. The HOA is claiming this is about property values and community harmony, not religious freedom." "That's complete nonsense," Brian exclaimed, his frustration boiling over. "This is nothing more than thinly veiled religious discrimination." "I know, and I'm going to make that argument forcefully in court," Sarah assured him. "But you have to understand, these types of cases can be unpredictable. We need to be ready for anything." Brian nodded, his jaw set with determination. "I'm not backing down, Sarah. My faith is the most important thing in my life, and I won't let them take that away from me." The day of the hearing arrived, and Brian clutched Sarah's hand as they made their way into the imposing federal courthouse. Linda and the HOA board were already there, their expressions smug. As the judge listened to the arguments from both sides, Brian felt his heart racing. This was it, the moment that would determine the fate of his doorbell chime and his very right to practice his religion in peace. When the judge finally rendered his decision, a hush fell over the courtroom. Brian held his breath, praying for a ruling in his favor. What happened next would change the course of his life forever. The judge's voice rang out, commanding the attention of everyone in the courtroom. "After careful consideration of the arguments presented by both sides, I have reached a decision." Brian felt his heart pounding in his chest as he waited with bated breath. Sarah gave his hand a reassuring squeeze, but he could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "The court finds in favor of the Homeowners Association." Brian's world seemed to tilt on its axis as the words registered. He had been so confident that the law was on his side, but somehow the judge had ruled against him. The defendant's doorbell chime is found to be in violation of the community covenants and an infringement on the rights of other residents. The judge continued, his gaze stern. "The chime must be removed within 30 days, or further legal action will be taken." Brian rose to his feet, his face flushed with disbelief and outrage. "But, Your Honor, this is a clear violation of my First Amendment rights. I have the freedom to practice my religion in my own home." The judge held up a hand, silencing him. "The court has made its decision, Mr. Johnson. The Homeowners Association is within its rights to enforce community standards, even if they conflict with your personal beliefs." Sarah stood up, her expression equally dismayed. "Your Honor, we strongly disagree with this ruling. This sets a dangerous precedent of allowing religious discrimination under the guise of community harmony. We intend to appeal." The judge nodded. "You are certainly within your rights to do so. However, the ruling stands, and the chime must be removed in the meantime." As Brian and Sarah exited the courthouse, a sense of defeat and outrage washed over Brian. He had been so sure that the law would be on his side, but somehow The judge had sided with the HOA. "I can't believe this is happening," he murmured, his hands trembling. "They're taking away my right to practice my faith in my own home." Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes filled with empathy. "I know, Brian. But we're not giving up. We're going to fight this all the way to the appeals court, and we're going to win." Brian nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Damn right we are. This isn't over by a long shot." As they walked to their car, Brian couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The battle had just begun, and he had no idea what other challenges lay ahead. The days following the court ruling were some of the most challenging Brian had ever faced. He was forced to remove the beloved doorbell chime, his heart sinking with each passing minute. It felt like a piece of his faith had been ripped away. As he packed up the chime, he couldn't help but think about the broader implications of the HOA's victory. If they could successfully suppress his religious expression in his own home, what was to stop them from doing the same to other homeowners? Fueled by this sense of injustice, Brian made a decision. He would not go down without a fight. Gathering his friends and fellow congregants from his church, Brian held an emergency meeting. "They've taken away my right to practice my faith in my own home," he declared, his voice trembling with emotion. "But I refuse to let them win." The group listened intently as Brian outlined his plan. He would defy the court order and keep the chime installed, even if it meant risking fines or legal action from the HOA. "This is about more than just my doorbell," he said passionately. "It's about defending the fundamental freedoms we all hold dear. Who's with me?" To his relief, the room erupted in applause and shouts of support. Brian felt a surge of hope and determination. He was not alone in this battle. Over the next few days, Brian and his allies worked tirelessly to prepare for the confrontation with the HOA. They researched legal precedents, organized community events, and even reached out to local media to shine a spotlight on the issue. When the 30-day deadline arrived, Brian stood proudly in front of his home, the doorbell chime still in place. As Linda and the HOA board approached, armed with a court order, he refused to back down. "This is my home, and this chime is an expression of my faith," he declared, his voice unwavering. "You'll have to pry it from my cold, dead hands." Linda's face contorted with fury. "Mr. Johnson, you are in direct violation of a federal court order. If you don't remove that chime immediately, we'll have no choice but to take legal action." Brian held his ground, surrounded by his supporters. "Then so be it. I'm prepared to go to jail if that's what it takes to defend my religious freedom." The standoff continued for hours, with the tension palpable in the air. Reporters and onlookers gathered, capturing the dramatic confrontation on camera. As the sun began to set, Brian knew that this was a pivotal moment. The outcome of this clash would determine the course of the entire battle, and possibly the fate of his freedom. The standoff between Brian and the HOA dragged on, with neither side willing to back down. As the sun began to set, the tension in the air was palpable, and Brian could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on him. Just as Linda was about to call the police to enforce the court order, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. Brian watched in curiosity as a well-dressed man stepped out and approached the group. "Excuse me, what seems to be the problem here?" the man asked, his voice calm and authoritative. Linda turned to him, her frustration evident. "Sir, this homeowner is in direct violation of a federal court order. We're here to ensure he removes his unlawful doorbell chime." The man nodded thoughtfully, his gaze shifting to Brian. "I see. And what's your side of the story, Mr. Johnson?" Brian quickly explained the situation, his voice filled with conviction. "This chime is an integral part of my religious practice. I have a constitutional right to express my faith in my own home, and I won't back down." The man listened intently, a slight frown creasing his brow. "I understand the gravity of the situation, and I'm sorry you're facing such a difficult predicament. However, I may be able to offer a potential solution." Brian's heart raced with hope as the man continued. My name is Michael Goldstein, and I'm an attorney specializing in religious liberty cases. I believe I can help you take this matter to the appeals court and potentially overturn the previous ruling." Linda's eyes widened in alarm. "You can't be serious. This is a clear-cut case of violating community standards. The court has already ruled in our favor." Michael turned to her, his expression cool. "With all due respect, Mrs. Goldstein, the court's decision was flawed and sets a dangerous precedent. I believe we have a strong case for appeal, and I'd be honored to represent Mr. Johnson." Brian could scarcely believe his luck. This unexpected intervention could be the turning point he desperately needed. "I'm more than willing to work with you, Mr. Goldstein. I can't thank you enough for stepping in." Michael smiled reassuringly. "Call me Michael. And you don't need to thank me. This is a matter of principle, and I'm glad to lend my expertise to defend your constitutional rights." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Brian felt a glimmer of hope reignite within him. With Michael Goldstein on his side, perhaps the tides were about to turn in this long-standing battle. The weeks leading up to the appeals court hearing were a whirlwind of activity for Brian and his newfound legal team. Michael Goldstein worked tirelessly, assembling a powerful case that challenged the previous court's ruling on religious freedom grounds. Meanwhile, the HOA ramped up their efforts to have Brian's doorbell chime removed, even going so far as to threaten him with hefty fines and the seizure of his home. But with Michael by his side, Brian refused to be intimidated. The day of the hearing arrived, and as Brian and Michael entered the imposing federal courthouse, he felt a mix of nervousness and determination. This was their chance to right the wrong that had been done, to restore his fundamental right to practice his faith. The courtroom was packed, with reporters and community members filling the seats. Linda and the HOA board were there too, their expressions tense and unyielding. As the hearing began, Michael Goldstein rose to address the panel of judges. His voice was clear and confident as he laid out the case, meticulously dismantling the previous ruling and arguing passionately for Brian's constitutional rights. "This is not simply about a doorbell chime," Michael declared, his gaze sweeping across the room. "It's about the very foundation of religious freedom in this country. The Homeowners Association has overstepped its bounds, trampling on Mr. Johnson's First Amendment rights in the name of community standards." Linda scoffed, interrupting him. "Your Honor, this is simply a matter of maintaining property values and ensuring all residents feel comfortable in their own homes. Mr. Johnson's religious display is disruptive and inappropriate." Michael turned to face her, his eyes narrowing. "With all due respect, Mrs. Goldstein, that argument holds no water. The Constitution does not cease to exist just because one lives in a homeowners association. Mr. Johnson has the right to express his faith without fear of persecution." The judges listened intently, their expressions unreadable. Brian held his breath, praying that his case would resonate with them. As the hearing drew to a close, the lead judge stood up, commanding the room's attention. "We have heard the arguments from both sides, and we will now take this matter under advisement. A decision will be rendered within the next 2 weeks." Brian felt a sense of dread and anticipation as he left the courthouse. The fate of his doorbell chime and his very right to religious freedom now rested in the hands of the appellate court. The 2 weeks following the appeals court hearing were agonizing for Brian. He spent countless hours pacing his living room, his mind racing with worry and uncertainty. Would the judges see the merits of his case? Or would they side with the Homeowners Association once again? Finally, the day of the ruling arrived. Brian and Michael made their way to the courthouse, their hearts pounding with anticipation. As they entered the courtroom, they were met with a sea of familiar faces. Members of Brian's church, local community leaders, and even a few reporters, all there to show their support. When the judges filed in and took their seats, the room fell silent. Brian gripped the edge of his seat, his knuckles turning white. The lead judge cleared his throat and began to speak. "We have carefully reviewed the arguments presented by both parties in this case. After much deliberation, we have reached a decision. Brian held his breath, bracing himself for the worst. The court finds in favor of the defendant, Mr. Brian Johnson. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom, followed by a thunderous round of applause. Brian felt a surge of relief and triumph wash over him as the judge continued. The previous ruling is hereby overturned. The Homeowners Association's actions were found to be in violation of Mr. Johnson's First Amendment rights to freedom of religion. The doorbell chime may remain, and the HOA is ordered to cease all further harassment or legal action against the defendant. As Brian embraced Michael, tears of joy streaming down his face, he couldn't believe the outcome. The system had worked. Justice had prevailed. Outside the courthouse, Brian was greeted by a jubilant crowd of supporters, all cheering and celebrating the victory. He raised his hands, the sound of the cherished doorbell chime ringing out once more. "Thank you all for standing with me," he proclaimed, his voice filled with emotion. "This isn't just a win for me, but for the principles of religious freedom and the Constitution that we all hold dear." As the sun set on that momentous day, Brian knew that the battle had been worth fighting. He had defended his faith, his home, and the very ideals that made this country great. And in the end, the power of the law and the unwavering commitment to justice had prevailed.